Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I was scrolling through Instagram on a quiet Sunday evening when I saw it. A smiling family photo taken on a sunlit beach, palm trees swaying in the background, with a caption that read, "Merry Christmas from Paradise. Family trips are the best. Hashtag Hawaii Christmas, hashtag family time." My stomach dropped as I stared at the image. There was my mom, my dad, and my sister, Megan, along with her husband, Tom. Even my aunt and uncle were there, grinning in matching Hawaiian shirts. But I wasn't. No one had mentioned a family trip to me. Not an invite, not a passing comment, not even a suggestion that something was being planned. I'd been left out entirely. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they assumed I couldn't take time off work, or that I wouldn't want to go. But as I clicked through Megan's stories, it became clear this wasn't some oversight. One video showed Megan lounging by the pool, laughing as she told the camera, "This was exactly what we all needed after such a stressful year. A big family getaway. All of us," she said, as if the phrase itself was a slap in the face. I called my mom that night, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey Mom," I said, "I just saw Megan's post. When did you guys plan a trip to Hawaii?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone dripping with guilt. "I was hoping Megan would talk to you about that." "Talk to me about what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well," Mom began, choosing her words carefully, "Megan thought it might be awkward if you came." "Awkward?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What does that even mean?" Mom sighed. She just thought it would be better to keep things simple. You know how Megan gets when she's stressed. She wanted to focus on the family dynamic that's already working. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I wasn't part of the family dynamic that was working. The conversation ended shortly after, but the sting of it lingered. I sat on the couch, staring at the photo on my phone. My chest felt heavy, and my mind raced with all the sacrifices I'd made for this family, especially for Megan. After her marriage to Tom, they'd struggled financially. Megan had always been impulsive, and Tom wasn't exactly known for his work ethic. When they hit rock bottom, I offered to let them move into my house rent-free while they got back on their feet. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. Just a few months, Megan had said. "We'll get back on track, and you won't even notice we're here." But a few months turned into 6, then a year, then nearly 2. During that time, I'd bitten my tongue while they left lights on, ran up the water bill, and took over the guest bathroom as if it were their own. I'd smiled through gritted teeth when Megan borrowed my car without asking, or when Tom conveniently forgot to contribute to the groceries. I'd sacrificed my privacy, my peace, and more money than I cared to calculate. All because they were family. And this was how they repaid me? The next day, I called Megan directly. "Hey," she said, her tone casual, as if nothing had happened. "I need to ask you something," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Why wasn't I invited to Hawaii?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Mom told me she talked to you about that." "She did," I said. "But I want to hear it from you." Megan's tone shifted, defensive now. "Look, Rachel, it's not a big deal. We thought it would be simpler if it was just the core family. You know, without adding any unnecessary tension." "Tension?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "What tension?" "You're always so serious," Megan said, as if she were scolding a child. "And honestly, Tom and I didn't think you'd fit the vibe of the trip. It's supposed to be relaxing, not complicated." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. "Not complicated?" I said, my voice rising. "You're living in my house, Megan. Rent-free. Do you have any idea how insulting this is?" "Rachel, don't make this a thing," she said, her tone dismissive. "It's just a trip. You're overreacting." Overreacting. That word hung in the air like a challenge. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, my hands trembling. I thought about the years I'd spent bending over backward for Megan, sacrificing my own comfort to help her out of one mess after another. For what? To be excluded from my own family? To be told I didn't fit the vibe? No more. Sometimes, the people closest to you can hurt you the most. What would you do if your kindness was repaid with betrayal? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment everything changed. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. After my heated call with Megan, I'd spent the rest of the day trying to calm down, but the anger simmered beneath the surface, refusing to fade. By the time I got home that evening, I'd made up my mind. Things were going to change. When I walked through the front door, Megan and Tom were in the living room. Megan was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while Tom had his feet propped up on the coffee table, a game controller in hand. The sight of them lounging in my house, completely oblivious to how much they disrespected me, was enough to make my blood boil. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. Megan looked up, her expression wary. "What's wrong now?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm done, Megan. I'm done being taken for granted. After everything I've done for you, the years of letting you live here rent-free, covering for your mistakes, this is how you treat me? Excluding me from a family trip? Telling me I don't fit the vibe?" She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down. "Oh, come on, Rachel. You're still upset about that? I already told you. It wasn't personal. Not personal." I repeated, incredulous. "You left me out of a Christmas trip with my own family and called it not personal? How else am I supposed to take that?" Tom glanced over from his game, finally chiming in. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Rachel. It's just a vacation." "No, Tom," I snapped. "It's not just a vacation. It's a slap in the face. And the fact that neither of you can see that just proves how little you respect me." Megan rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "Look, we didn't invite you because we didn't want any drama. You're always so serious, Rachel. You overthink everything, and honestly, it's exhausting. We wanted a relaxing trip, not complications." Her words stung, but they also made my decision that much easier. "Fine," I said coldly. "If that's how you feel, then you can pack your things. You have 30 days to move out." The room fell silent. Megan stared at me, her jaw dropping slightly. "You're kicking us out?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've let you live here rent-free for almost 2 years. I've bent over backward to help you. And this is how you treat me? I'm done." Tom stood up, his tone shifting from dismissive to defensive. "You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said. "You're both adults. Figure it out." Megan shot up from the couch, her face flushed with anger. "You're being ridiculous, Rachel. We're family. You can't just throw us out like this." "I can," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I am." Megan's expression changed, her voice softening in an attempt to manipulate me. "Rachel, come on. Don't do this. We've been through so much together. You know we don't have anywhere else to go. The kids love it here. They're comfortable. You don't want to hurt them, do you?" I clenched my fists, fighting the guilt that threatened to creep in. Megan was always good at this, twisting the narrative to make herself the victim, to make me feel like the bad guy. "I'm not hurting anyone," I said, my voice steady. "You're the ones who've taken advantage of me. I've given you everything I can, Megan. I can't do it anymore?" Megan's demeanor snapped back to anger. "You're unbelievable. After everything we've been through, you're seriously going to throw us out over something so petty?" "Petty?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This isn't petty, Megan. This is years of disrespect, entitlement, and taking me for granted. And I'm finally standing up for myself." Tom stepped closer, his tone now laced with hostility. "You realize this is going to tear the family apart, right? You're making a huge mistake." I looked at him, my jaw tight. "No, Tom. The mistake was thinking you could walk all over me and there wouldn't be consequences. If this tears the family apart, that's on you, not me." The room was silent again, the weight of my words settling over all of us. Megan glared at me, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "Fine," she said finally, her voice dripping with venom. "But don't come crying to us when you end up alone. You're going to regret this, Rachel." "I'll take my chances," I replied. As I walked out of the room, my heart pounded in my chest. Part of me felt a surge of relief, like I'd finally reclaimed a piece of myself that I'd lost. But another part of me felt heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially when it means going against your own family. But sometimes, it's the only choice you have left. What happens when standing up for yourself means risking everything? Would you make the same decision, or would you let it go to keep the peace? Let me know, because for me, this was just the beginning of the fallout. The morning after our confrontation, the house felt different. There was an uncomfortable silence, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the muffled voices from the living room where Megan and Tom were arguing in hushed tones. I knew they were angry. That was fine. I was angry too. But anger wasn't going to change my mind. By midday, Megan and Tom had started packing, though reluctantly doesn't even begin to cover it. Boxes were haphazardly thrown together, and every loud crash or heavy sigh from the other room felt deliberately exaggerated, like they wanted me to hear how much they were struggling. At one point, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and Megan was there, leaning against the counter with a scowl. This is what you want, she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Watching your own sister struggle to figure out where we're going to live. I took a deep breath before responding. I want my home back, Megan. I want peace. And I want you to take responsibility for your actions for once. She scoffed, brushing past me without another word. The real storm started that afternoon when my phone began buzzing nonstop. The first call came from my mom. Rachel, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. What is going on? Megan just called us. Crying? Saying you're throwing her out of the house. I'm not throwing her out, I said, though my patience was already wearing thin. I gave her 30 days to find somewhere else. That's plenty of time. Rachel, she said again, softer this time, like she was trying to reason with a child. You can't do this. She's your sister. Family helps family. And what about everything I've done for her so far? I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. I've let her live here rent-free for almost 2 years. I've paid for groceries, covered bills, given her and Tom chance after chance to get on their feet. When does it stop, Mom? There was a pause on the other end of the line. She's in a tough spot right now, Mom said finally. She just needs a little more time. No, Mom, I said firmly. She doesn't need more time. She needs to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. And I'm not going to keep enabling her. The second call came from my dad, though his approach was less emotional and more direct. You're being unreasonable, he said bluntly. Kicking your sister out over a misunderstanding? You're better than this, Rachel. A misunderstanding? I repeated, stunned. She deliberately excluded me from a family trip and told me I didn't fit the vibe. How is that a misunderstanding? Families fight, he said. It doesn't mean you throw them to the wolves. I'm not throwing anyone to the wolves, I said through gritted teeth. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Well, it sure doesn't sound like it, he replied before hanging up. Over the next few days, the calls continued. Some from relatives I barely spoke to, all repeating the same refrain. How could you do this to your own sister? It was exhausting. No one seemed interested in hearing my side of the story. Megan had clearly gotten to them first, spinning her version of events in which I was the cruel, heartless villain who'd abandoned her in her time of need. I knew I shouldn't let it get to me. But after the 5th or 6th call, doubt started creeping in. Was I being too harsh? Had I overreacted? I replayed the confrontation in my mind, wondering if there was a way I could have handled it differently. But every time, I came back to the same conclusion. This wasn't about a single incident. It was about years of disrespect, entitlement, and taking me for granted. And I wasn't going to let it continue. A few days later, I came home to find Megan and Tom gone. Their cars were no longer in the driveway, and the house was eerily quiet. Almost too quiet. At first, I felt a sense of relief. But then I walked into my bedroom and found an envelope on my nightstand with my name scrawled across the front in Megan's handwriting. I opened it, expecting an apology, or at least an attempt at one. Instead, it was a scathing letter filled with bitterness and blame. Rachel, congratulations. You got what you wanted. We're out of your house, and you can go back to living your perfect little life without us in the way. But don't think for a second that this makes you the better person. You've always been self-righteous, acting like you're better than everyone else just because you've got your life together. Well, newsflash, you're not. You think you've won because you kicked us out? All you've done is prove that you're selfish and heartless. Family is supposed to be there for each other, but I guess that doesn't apply to you. And when you're old and alone, don't expect us to be there for you. Megan, I read the letter twice, my hands trembling with anger. It was classic Megan, twisting the story to make herself the victim while completely ignoring the role she'd played in all of this. I threw the letter in the trash and sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. Standing up for yourself is supposed to feel empowering, but in that moment, all I felt was tired. What do you do when doing the right thing makes you feel like the villain? Would you second-guess yourself? Or would you stand firm? Let me know, because for me, the hardest part was yet to come. Sitting on the couch in the now quiet house, I finally let myself breathe. The silence felt strange, almost unnatural, after years of Megan and Tom's constant presence. But as I glanced around the living room, which still bore the marks of their stay, the worn cushions, the scuff marks on the walls, I felt the weight of everything I'd endured for them pressing down on me. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the memories play like a film reel in my mind. It started long before Megan and Tom moved in. Growing up, Megan was always the golden child. She was charming, outgoing, and could talk her way out of just about anything. Our parents adored her, often brushing off her mistakes as just Megan being Megan. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, The planner, the fixer, the one who picked up the pieces when Megan's impulsiveness inevitably caused chaos. One memory stood out clearly: Megan's senior year of high school. She decided on a whim to throw a party while our parents were out of town. The night ended with a trashed living room, a broken window, and several furious neighbors. When our parents came home and saw the mess, Megan broke into tears, swearing it was a one-time mistake. Our dad sighed and said, "Rachel, help her clean this up." I spent the entire weekend scrubbing carpets and replacing broken picture frames while Megan lounged in her room, scrolling through her phone. That pattern followed us into adulthood. When Megan married Tom, everyone warned her it was a bad idea. He was charming but aimless, bouncing from one half-baked scheme to the next. But Megan insisted he was the one, and our parents, as always, supported her decision without question. 6 months into their marriage, Megan called me in tears. Tom had maxed out their joint credit card on a failed business venture, and they couldn't make rent. "Rachel," she said, her voice trembling, "we're going to lose the apartment. I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, I wired her the money to cover the rent. I didn't ask questions, and I didn't set conditions. I just did what I always did: solve the problem. That one-time favor turned into a pattern. Over the next few years, I bailed Megan and Tom out more times than I could count. When Tom lost his job, I covered their utility bills. When Megan wanted to start her own online boutique, I loaned her the startup money, which I never saw again. And then came the big one. When they hit rock bottom, I let them move into my house rent-free. "Just until we get back on our feet," Megan had said, her tone so earnest I almost believed her. But they never got back on their feet. They just got comfortable. The worst part wasn't even the financial strain. It was the emotional toll. Megan had a way of making her problems feel like emergencies, crises that demanded my immediate attention. If I hesitated, even for a moment, she'd accuse me of not caring or being selfish. "Family helps family," she'd say, her voice laced with guilt. "What's wrong with you?" I spent years living in that cycle, constantly sacrificing my own needs to keep Megan afloat. But now, as I sat in the empty house, I realized something I'd never let myself admit before. Megan had never appreciated my help. She expected it. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of freedom. I'd stood up for myself. I'd set a boundary, and I'd enforced it, no matter how much pushback I'd gotten. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And sitting there in the silence of my own home, I felt the weight of years of sacrifice begin to lift. The sound of my phone buzzing snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was a voicemail from my dad. I hesitated before pressing play. "Rachel," his voice began, slow and measured, as if he were trying to keep his emotions in check. "I think it's time we all sat down and talked about this. Megan's struggling, and your mom and I are really worried about her. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. Please, Rachel, do the right thing. Call me back." I stared at the phone, a mix of frustration and sadness churning in my chest. "Do the right thing," he'd said. But whose version of right was he talking about? What do you do when doing the right thing for your family means betraying yourself? Would you go to the family meeting, or would you stand your ground? Let me know, because for me, this was a crossroads I wasn't sure how to navigate. The family meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in. As I pulled into the driveway, my stomach churned with a mix of dread and anger. I knew this wasn't going to be a civil discussion. It was going to be an ambush. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't here to mend fences with Megan or Tom. I wasn't even here to appease my parents. I was here to make it clear that I wouldn't be manipulated anymore. I walked up the familiar porch steps and knocked, bracing myself for the storm ahead. The moment I stepped inside, the tension was palpable. Megan and Tom sat on the couch, their expressions a mix of smugness and feigned victimhood. My parents were in their usual chairs, their faces tight with worry. "Rachel," my mom said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Thanks for coming." I nodded but didn't reply. Instead, I sat in the empty chair opposite Megan, meeting her gaze with a calm, steady stare. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "let's talk." Megan was the first to speak, of course. "I can't believe it's come to this," she said, her voice thick with fake emotion. "I never thought my own sister would turn her back on me like this." "Turn my back on you?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're the one who deliberately excluded me from a family trip and then acted like it was no big deal." "Oh, here we go again," Megan said, rolling her eyes. "Are you seriously still hung up on that? I already told you it wasn't personal." "Not personal?" I said, my voice rising. You told Mom it would be too awkward if I came. How is that not personal, Megan? Tom jumped in, his tone smug. Look, Rachel, we're not here to rehash old arguments. We're here to figure out how to move forward. But the way you've been acting, kicking us out, refusing to talk, it's completely out of line. I turned to him, my anger bubbling to the surface. Out of line? Let's talk about what's out of line, Tom. Like living in someone's house rent-free for 2 years and then acting like you're entitled to it. Or taking and taking without ever giving anything back. You two have been leeching off me for years, and now that I've finally said enough, you're playing the victims. That's not fair, Megan snapped. We were doing the best we could. No, you weren't, I said, my voice steady. You were doing the bare minimum and expecting me to pick up the slack. And I'm done. My mom stepped in, holding up her hands as if to stop the argument. Enough, both of you, she said. This isn't helping. Helping who? I asked, turning to her. Because it seems like every time Megan screws up, you and Dad rush in to fix it. And when you can't, you expect me to do it. When does it stop, Mom? That's not what we're doing, she said defensively. Yes, it is, I said firmly. You've been enabling her for years, and now you're angry because I won't do it anymore. The room fell silent for a moment, but then Megan spoke again, her voice dripping with bitterness. You've always looked down on me, she said, ever since we were kids. You act like you're so much better than me because you have your life together. But you're not perfect, Rachel. You're selfish. You don't care about anyone but yourself. I stared at her, my jaw tight. If standing up for myself makes me selfish, then fine. I'll be selfish. But at least I'm not taking advantage of the people who care about me. The conversation devolved into chaos after that. Accusations flew from all sides. Megan blaming me for her struggles, my parents pleading for peace, and Tom throwing in snide comments whenever he could. I sat there, taking it all in, letting their words wash over me like background noise. I wasn't here to change their minds. I was here to make my position clear. When the shouting finally died down, I stood up, looking each of them in the eye. This is how it's going to be, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not responsible for Megan's choices. I've done more than enough to help her, and I won't do it anymore. If you want to keep enabling her, that's your decision. But don't expect me to be a part of it. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Rachel, please. Don't say that. I mean it, I said, turning to her. Either you stop pressuring me, or I'll cut ties completely. I'm done being the scapegoat for this family. Megan scoffed, crossing her arms. Fine. Walk away, Rachel. See if we care. I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. You already made it clear how much you care when you excluded me from that trip. I'm just returning the favor. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my bag and walked out the door, my head held high. What do you do when standing up for yourself means risking your family ties? Would you hold your ground, or would you try to rebuild the relationship? Let me know, because for me, there was no turning back. The house was finally mine again. No loud arguments echoing through the halls. No piles of unwashed dishes mysteriously appearing in the sink. No late-night emergencies requiring my immediate attention. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so at first. But slowly, I began to settle into the peace I'd fought so hard for. I started small, reclaiming my space one room at a time. Megan and Tom had left behind plenty of reminders of their stay. Boxes of junk in the garage, scuffed walls in the hallway, even a forgotten pair of sneakers by the front door. Clearing it all out felt like exorcising ghosts, and with every bag I tossed, I felt lighter. With my house back in order, I turned my attention to my own life, something I hadn't done in years. I reached out to old friends, the ones I'd unintentionally distanced myself from while dealing with Megan's endless demands. One Friday night, I met up with my best friend, Sarah, for dinner. You look different, she said as we clinked glasses. Different how? I asked, curious. Lighter, she said with a smile. Like you finally let go of something heavy. I smiled back, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. I think I did. We spent hours catching up, laughing about old memories and talking about everything from work to weekend plans. It reminded me of who I was before Megan's chaos took over my life, a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Meanwhile, Megan and Tom's struggles became impossible to ignore, even from a distance. I heard through the grapevine that they were staying with a friend, though it wasn't going well. Megan's friend had apparently grown tired of their antics after just a few weeks, and they were already looking for another place to crash. And then there was Tom. Did you hear? Sarah said during one of our weekly phone calls. Tom got fired again. I sighed, unsurprised. What happened this time? Apparently, he called in sick 3 times in 1 week, and then showed up late when he did come in. His boss finally had enough. I shook my head, a mix of frustration and resignation bubbling to the surface. Tom's inability to hold a job had always been a sore spot, one Megan conveniently ignored whenever it suited her. Despite everything, there were moments when guilt crept in. I thought about my nieces and nephew, who were caught in the middle of all this. They hadn't asked to be dragged from one unstable situation to another, and part of me wondered if I should have done more for their sake. But then I reminded myself of the truth. I couldn't save Megan from herself. Every time I tried, it only made things worse. I'd spent years sacrificing my own well-being to keep her afloat, and all it had done was enable her to sink deeper. I couldn't pour from an empty cup. One evening, as I was settling in with a glass of wine and a good book, I noticed a new email notification on my phone. When I saw Megan's name in the subject line, my stomach tightened. I debated whether to open it, half expecting another round of blame or guilt trips. But curiosity got the better of me, and I tapped the screen. Subject: I'm sorry. Rachel, I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it. I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I realize now how much I've hurt you. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. You've always been there for me, and instead of appreciating that, I took advantage of you. Things aren't going well right now. Tom still hasn't found a job, and we're struggling to make ends meet. The kids are asking questions I don't know how to answer, and I feel like I've failed them. I know I have no right to ask for anything after everything I've done, but I'm desperate. If there's any way you can help us, just this once, I promise I'll find a way to make it up to you. Please, Rachel. I don't know what else to do. Megan. I stared at the screen, my emotions swirling. Anger, sadness, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name. The apology I'd wanted for years was finally here, but it came wrapped in another plea for help. I set my phone down, unable to respond right away. Cliffhanger. What do you do when an apology feels sincere but comes with strings attached? Would you extend a hand, or would you protect yourself from getting hurt again? Let me know, because for me, this decision wasn't as simple as it seemed. The morning of my meeting with Megan was heavy with anticipation. After days of debating whether to respond to her email, I finally agreed, but only on my terms. We'd meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, choosing a table near the window where I could see her coming. My hands fidgeted with my cup, nerves buzzing. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment years in the making. When Megan finally walked in, I was struck by how tired she looked. Her usual polished appearance had given way to dark circles under her eyes and a frazzled demeanor. She spotted me and gave a small, hesitant wave before making her way over. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from me. "Hi," I replied, my tone neutral. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup the barista had just set down, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from it. "Thank you for meeting me," she said finally. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Megan took a deep breath. "I know I don't deserve it," she began. "After everything I've done, I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see me again. But I didn't know what else to do." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw something genuine in her, something raw and unguarded. "Megan," I said carefully, "if you want my help, I need you to be honest with me. No half-truths, no excuses. Just the truth." She nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." And then it all came pouring out. Megan admitted that their financial situation was worse than she'd let on. Tom hadn't worked in months, and they were living paycheck to paycheck off a part-time job she'd taken at a local bakery. Bills were piling up, and they were on the verge of losing their car. "I've been trying to hold it together for the kids," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's hard, Rachel. It's so hard." I listened, my heart aching for my nieces and nephew. But as much as I sympathized with their situation, I couldn't ignore the choices that had led them here. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, my tone steady. "But Megan, this didn't happen overnight. You and Tom have made a lot of bad decisions, and instead of fixing them, you've relied on other people. On me, to bail you out." She flinched, but I pressed on. "You can't keep living like this," I continued. "It's not fair to you, to the kids, or to the people who care about you." "I know," she whispered. "I know we've made mistakes. But we're trying, Rachel. We need a little help to get back on our feet." "And what happens after that?" I asked. "What happens when you need help again? Because I can't keep being your safety net, Megan. It's not sustainable. For you, or for me." Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked down at the table. "We're family," she said, her voice barely audible. "Isn't that what family's supposed to do? Help each other?" I let out a long breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Family is supposed to support each other, yes, I said, but it's not supposed to be one-sided. I've supported you for years, Megan, and what did I get in return? Disrespect, entitlement, and being excluded from my own family's life. Her tears spilled over, and she reached for a napkin. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I really am. I know I've been awful to you. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until now. Her apology was everything I'd wanted to hear. But it wasn't enough. Not without action to back it up. I forgive you, I said, surprising even myself with how much I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to fix everything for you. That's not my job. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. I'll help with the kids, I said after a moment. If they need school supplies or clothes, let me know, and I'll cover it. But I won't give you or Tom money directly. You both need to figure out how to take care of yourselves. Megan looked up, a mixture of gratitude and disappointment on her face. Thank you, she said quietly. I know you're right. It's hard. I know it is, I said, but it's the only way things will ever get better. The conversation ended shortly after that. As we walked out of the coffee shop, Megan gave me a tight hug and whispered, I'll try to do better. I promise. I wanted to believe her. But as I watched her walk away, a part of me couldn't shake the doubt lingering in my mind. What do you do when someone says they'll change, but has a history of breaking promises? Would you trust them one last time, or would you protect yourself from being hurt again? Let me know, because for me, the next steps weren't clear. Months had passed since that conversation with Megan, and the dust had begun to settle, or at least I told myself it had. Life felt different now, lighter. Without Megan and Tom in my house, there was room to breathe, both literally and figuratively. The space felt like mine again. I'd redecorated the guest room they'd once taken over, turning it into an office with a cozy reading nook. Every time I sat in that chair with a book in hand, it felt like a small act of reclaiming my peace. It wasn't just the physical changes that made a difference. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. I was setting boundaries and, more importantly, sticking to them. I stopped answering every guilt-laden call from my mom and didn't let my dad's curt comments about family obligations get under my skin. Instead, I redirected my energy toward things that truly mattered to me: my friends, my career, and my own mental health. And for a while, it felt like I was thriving. But the scars of the fallout weren't easy to ignore. Family gatherings had become strained. When I did see my parents, the tension was palpable. They were polite, but there was a noticeable distance between us. Mom still seemed to hold out hope that I'd change my mind, occasionally dropping hints like, it's never too late to make amends. Dad, on the other hand, had mostly stopped trying to discuss the situation altogether. His approach was to pretend nothing had happened, though the occasional sigh or pointed comment reminded me that he hadn't forgiven me for what he saw as an unforgivable betrayal of family values. As for Megan, I'd heard bits and pieces about her from mutual acquaintances. She and Tom were still struggling, moving from one unstable situation to another. Rumor had it that Tom had taken up a string of odd jobs, none of which lasted more than a few weeks. I wished I could say I felt vindicated, but the truth was more complicated. There was no joy in watching my sister struggle, no satisfaction in knowing that I'd been right about the choices she and Tom had made. If anything, it left a hollow ache in my chest, a reminder of how far we'd drifted from the days when we were just two kids playing in the backyard, unaware of the complexities adulthood would bring. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Sarah, sipping iced tea and catching up. You seem different, she said, studying me. Different how? I asked, curious. Stronger, she said. Like you finally realized you don't have to carry everyone else's baggage. I smiled, grateful for her words. I guess I just got tired of being everyone's safety net. It's exhausting, Oh, I know, Sarah said with a laugh. But I'm proud of you. It's not easy to stand up to your family. Her words stuck with me long after she left. Was I proud of myself? In some ways, yes. I'd done what I needed to do to protect my own well-being. But the lingering sadness of a fractured family was hard to ignore. One evening, as I was settling in for the night, my phone buzzed with a new message. When I saw Megan's name, my chest tightened. You'll regret this someday. That was all it said. I stared at the screen, my emotions swirling. Was it a threat? A desperate attempt to get my attention? Or just another way for Megan to deflect blame and make me the villain? I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care. I didn't respond. Months of distance had given me clarity. Megan and I might share blood, but that didn't mean I was obligated to endure her toxicity. I could love her from afar, wish her the best, and still choose to prioritize my own peace? Is standing up for yourself worth the cost of losing family? Or are some relationships too toxic to maintain? I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. Peace isn't something anyone else can give you. You have to fight for it, protect it, and sometimes make the hardest decisions to keep it. What would you do? Would you hold firm or try to mend a rift? Let me know, because for me, this journey isn't over, and maybe it never will be.